today I'm going to be giving you a peek behind the scenes of how you go about redesigning an entire SaaS application. I'm going to be redesigning a site called GTMetrix, which is a performance analysis tool that you would put your website into, and it would tell you essentially how quickly it loads and how well the HTML content is structured on that page. So basically it tells you if you have a good site or a bad site. But the UI looks quite dated. I mean, there's lots of things we'll talk about and things we'll improve, but here's essentially the dashboard page that we're going to be starting with today. And as you can see, we've got the style guide as always, really nice blue hues and some nice blacks taken directly from their site. And we're bumping them up to IBM Plex Sans, which is kind of a very tacky, nice edgy font that gives off the kind of technical vibe we're going for here. Let's jump into the first page, and I'm going to walk you through exactly everything that I did to make it look really damn nice. Alright, so before we get started, what's actually wrong with this UI? I'm going to start with the dashboard here, and the navigation and footer are both just a little out of date. In particular, you can see there's like inconsistent treatments for these navigation links. And then of course, like over here, we've got a completely separate treatment for the drop down. It's very strange. Also, the navigation in the header, I think, is not necessarily the best practice anymore, especially for a logged in SaaS app. You should really have the navigation over on the left. Additionally, you've got this kind of call to action here, which pulls your attention, and I think is important that it does that because this is kind of like a guided tour, but it pulls my attention but doesn't explain why it's pulling my attention. The first thing I read is welcome Mark. Okay, hi, you've got my attention, you're now wasting my time. So we're going to have to explain this a little more clearly, and I think I'm going to tidy this up a little bit more because this skip tours now button is very hidden, and then these are kind of not really explained, like what do these do? Also, the visual hierarchy is a bit confusing. For example, we don't need this. We know we're on the dashboard. It's implied by being on the home page. We don't need to explicitly say dashboard. There's lots of colors kind of pulling my attention all over the place. So up here, and here, here, weird share buttons down here. There's lots of different things. Like, where should I be looking? Now, if you're thinking about it from the user's perspective, the answer is here. This is the main focus because you want them to come in and add a new report. And then secondarily, you want them to be able to, fill or see all the reports they've ran in the past. Now, whenever I'm doing one of these kind of involved SaaS app redesigns, I do a lot of this behind the scenes, and I'm going to walk through it today. But first, I have a list of user stories. These are the things that I want the user to be able to do with this app, and they're usually ranked by priority. So this is top priority. Obviously, I need to audit my site to see how it performs. And then least lowest priority is I need to access my account, right? It's just basic things. It should be relatively easy to do, but at the end of the day, this is the most important one. And then from there, I'll kind of just mock something up that's relatively low fidelity. So for here, the dashboard, I'm expecting that we'll probably use a sidebar navigation instead of the one that we have today. So we'll get this over here, and we'll have GTMetrix. So we'll just put this as the logo. Not bad. And then we'll have the navigation links here on the side. Pretty standard, nothing fancy here. Maybe have a simple little copyright filter down here. We'll do this in gray to imply that it's less important than the other stuff. And then we'll probably have maybe a big page title here. So we'll use let's just use a thicker line for this. And then I'll have some data. Now, the thing I want to emphasize here is that big search box. So it's just going to be probably right here, and probably quite big, with a little button right next to it. Something that's the button should say something like or start. And then from here, we'll probably have a secondary list, a really basic table that houses all of the reports that I've done in the past. So we're talking just list of reports, nothing crazy here, with A, B, C, D, and then some a little details button. Just repeat this down here. And we'll probably want some metadata, right? I would imagine if I was looking at reports, I'd probably be interested in just seeing how the report was run, and any sort of important metadata about it. But really what I'm mostly interested in is this grade here. That's the really important part. So I think that this is going to be relatively easy to do. The hard part, the heavy lifting is going to be in the sidebar, and then making sure the information hierarchy is solid. I'm going to start with the easy stuff, right? Well, I say easy stuff. I'm going to start with the things that I know how to do well, which is the navigation. If we can get the navigation down, you solve so many usability problems. And the hard part for me is going to be like figuring out the information hierarchy for this whole section here. So we'll start with the navigation, and then we'll see what we come up with there. I really wanted to try and beef up their logo, but again, your logo really shouldn't be the focal point of the app, so I'm just using a much more tacky font and just typing it in here. Nothing crazy, but it should get the job done. We need some sort of separator here to indicate that this is the sidebar and this is the main content. Obviously, we could just kind of imply that by the way it's organized, right? But I don't think that's going to be enough in this case. So I'm going to look at some inspiration here to see if I can figure out how to imply that something is a sidebar without introducing too much color. Okay, so I went on SaaSinterface.com, which I normally go to when I'm trying to just get some inspiration, and I found Bonsai. And I really like Bonsai's treatment here because they're able to heavily imply that something's a sidebar without pulling too much attention to it. So I think the important takeaways are that A, it's recessed into the background. And the way that you imply that is you add a very subtle, like slightly darker hue than your primary white or light color on the UI. And then you also kind of add this nice little line here that says, hey, look, I'm clearly separated from this main container. So we're going to try and reproduce something like this in the UI. And oftentimes when I'm doing these kinds of redesigns, I'm straight up just copying things from other apps that do things really well. The art of design is like finding a way to piece together all the jigsaw puzzle pieces in a way that forms a cohesive user experience for the person on the other side. So whenever I'm doing this, it's important that I have just a solid reference right next to the thing I'm building. So in this example, I'm going to just put it right next to here. And it looks like just looking at this UI, I'm already having ideas. So here we've got this nice green logo next to the text. And then in our example, it's just like boring text. So maybe if we want to add some more flair, we would take this GT and we do something fancy to it, just like GT, and just like add some flair and then put metrics right next to it. So that's something that we're just going to do that later. Like I don't want to get bogged down in the details just yet. But I'm going to put a comment and just say add some color flair here to make it pop. And then Shift C to hide comments while you're working. Alright, so it looks like they're using a thicker font, so I'm going to try the medium weight font, see what that's all about. Whenever you're playing around with icons next to text in a relationship like this, where there's an icon that describes the text, you just want the icon to be a slightly lighter hue than the text in order for it to look good. It's kind of just one of those heuristics that just seems to work. If it's the same color, it looks like it clashes a little bit too much and it's hard to distinguish between the text and the outline of the icon itself. But you make it just slightly lighter and it then becomes obvious that they're distinct and it feels more clean. Now, as I'm going through this, I know this looks quite bad. I'm not I'm not worried about making it very polished right now, because if I do that, I'm going to be stuck endlessly working on this navigation. So I know that, like, generally speaking, this is okay. It's good enough for now. We can come back to it later. But at the very least, we're getting like just the fundamentals sorted out. So we're going to add a little bit of polish to this navigation so it actually looks like a nav bar, and then probably just move on to the next part. We will come back to this though and make it look really sexy. It's also worth noting that you can tell this obviously isn't just black, right? They're using just a very, very dark and a very slightly lighter hue of their green. So we're going to try to do that in the sidebar as well, so that we have a little tiny, tiny splash of color. Nothing that's too distracting, but it just has a little bit more brand feel to it. And you can tell already this is immediately better. Like, this just looks so clean. And yes, we're using Bonsai for reference, but kind of over time, you just develop a sense for when this type of treatment would work. So I already knew this would probably work. Just using Bonsai as a reference helps to speed everything up and gives us an anchor to something real. Okay, doesn't look that bad. I'm noticing a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to have to make this text a little bit bigger, because when I look at this in context, it's just a tad too small. And I'm also going to have to add the same color treatments to the logo so that it doesn't look as jarring next to one another. Alright, so after a little more polishing, I think this looks okay. I mean, there's still problems here, namely the logo needs some work. Like, it definitely needs to be distinguished from these links a little bit. And then also, I think I need to add something here. There's just a little too much white space. We're definitely going to add a little user and settings menu down here. But beyond that, I think we may need to add like a list of tests, perhaps. Oh, that's a good idea. We could just add all the tests in here in the sidebar. That way they don't have to look at a dedicated table. So I'm just going to put a little note here to maybe add that back in here. Oops. And then I'm going to move to the header right now so that we can just have something that actually looks like a SaaS product. Okay, so to solve the problem I was experiencing of having the links look a little too opaque and implying they might have been disabled, I've just added an additional treatment to the active page, which highlights the background. And this implies, hey, I'm the active state, and now we can make these a little bit darker, and there's no implication that they are the active state. They're just kind of sitting in the background waiting for a user to click on them. All right, so the first thing that I want at the top of this page is like that guided experience banner, this thing here that exists currently. But I'm gonna try and design it in a way that it doesn't pull too much attention. It just kind of stays there and hints that you should maybe click it, and it clearly explains what will happen when I click it. I'm also gonna give the entire UI just I'm going to give the body a container so that on very large screens it doesn't just expand and expand and expand. Now, instead of saying like, welcome, Mark, and not really giving me anything meaningful to take away from it, like, it explains what it's doing, but it doesn't explain it until we're down here. I want to instead just immediately explain what's going on. And I don't want it to seem like a lot of work. 3 easy tours? I'm like, what? Like, I don't even want to do 1 tour. Just get me up and running. Your SaaS app needs to be so simple that it can take me less than a couple of minutes to just get familiar with the UI. So that's what we're going to kind of try to broadcast to the user here. Get started in less than 1 minute. Never really want text being much longer than a couple hundred pixels. That way it's a lot easier to read. You don't want people craning their necks back and forth to like read a line of text, you know? Gonna add a little icon here to just add some kind of visual flair and kind of indicator to explain what we're doing here. And it's also worth noting that whenever you are putting an icon in a container like this and you want it to take up more space, your inclination is just to make the icon bigger. Like you just make this like 50 pixels wide, right? I'll just do like 45, for instance, right? But then this looks weird. For many reasons. First of all, iconography is generally designed to be small, so when it gets blown up, it looks kind of out of proportion. And secondly, it pulls a lot of visual attention because icons are usually quite visually complex and colorful, and your eyes go straight here. So instead of doing that, you just add a little border around it like this, and then you get a little bit more emphasis and like visual balance without taking up too much visual attention. Now we're going to build out the control that allows you to trigger a new performance audit. And now that I've put this in, I'm realizing that I've created a problem. I have this here, which is supposed to be like the primary call to action, but until users dismiss this, this is conflicting. They're both equal weight. So I need to do something to fix this. And I think I know what to do. I'm just gonna make it a ghost button by removing the fill and changing it to be the same color as a stroke and the actual text itself. And I think that should do it for now, but we may need to revisit this. Actually, it looks like it needs a little bit of a fill. I'm just gonna give it like what did we use over here? 100? Yeah, that's fine for now. In fact, maybe even just get rid of the stroke now. Yeah, I think that's fine. Constantly just tweaking things. As you build things, right? Like you're gonna notice the visual hierarchy changes every single time you make a tweak. So don't be afraid to just like get back in here and go back to things you've already completed and just rework them once you've added new features. There's totally nothing wrong with that. It can get to be a problem, right, if you're doing way too much of it, but at least for now, it's okay. And then whenever I'm creating a table, it's really difficult to build a table aesthetic that fits the existing aesthetic. So I'm going to be leaning heavily on references from other apps here to see if I can build something that's clean and modern and doesn't like totally change the look and feel of the app. I want to place a label on this table, right here. But the problem is, if I put a label here and I don't put one here, it pulls more visual attention to this container, and I don't necessarily want that because I want this to be like the primary thing that users go to. So I'm thinking I might either just get rid of these headers altogether or make them more subtle somehow. But either way, that's the design problem I'm trying to solve now. Oh man. Okay, so I think I have a solution. Instead of using the title to label it, I can just add the secondary navigation in that already exists, this here, and then use this as the label so that we don't need this label or this label. And I think that will solve our problem. So what we need to build now is a secondary navigation. So let me do that now. Nice. I think this solves that design problem quite well. And I think this is what the original designers were going for with their secondary nav. Who knows really, but this allows us to label the table without pulling too much visual attention and still make sure that this is the priority. We might add even more treatments to this in a minute, but let's just assume this is going to be okay for now and get this table together. Okay, so I have an idea that I want to try out. I'm thinking that users might want to like analyze a new page from anywhere in the UI, regardless of kind of the state of the app. So I'm thinking maybe we put this in like a persistent header up here. I'm just going to try this out and see if it helps at all, and see if it works rather. And then that way we don't have to deal with the competing interest here altogether. So we'll come back to this table in a minute. Just going to take a break to work on that instead. And whenever you are doing a treatment like this, where you're putting kind of a significant text control in a header, you probably just want to make it take up the full height. So I'm going to tweak this a little bit as well. And then I'm going to, yeah, okay. I think I see what we need to do here. we should put something over here. And I was initially going to put the user menu down here, but we can just put the user menu up here and then put like call to actions down here or something. Yeah, let's try that. Adding a little call to action in the header here that could also just be persistent so that we can both distribute the visual load a little bit better and, of course, give the tool a mechanism to upsell people throughout the entire app. And now that I've put this in the header, we do have a persistent way to do this, right? But I think it would also make sense to have this on the dashboard. Otherwise, you're just looking at a list of reports, which is already here in all reports. So I think having this here makes a lot of sense. And then it can just stay persistent so that users can still use the primary utility of the app elsewhere, but it's kind of the main focal point here. I really liked the idea of just placing an icon to describe a particular option. It's pretty obvious that if I show you the Google Chrome logo, that I mean I ran this test in Google Chrome. So we're going to try and persist that, but it did pull quite a bit of visual attention in the existing UI, right? Like this is pretty saturated colors, so I might subdue them a little bit, or maybe not. I'm just going to have to take a look and kind of figure out what the deal is here once I get this in context, and then we'll reevaluate. Oftentimes I struggle to determine whether or not I should put these kinds of separator bars in tables, and I've found over time that the reason you want one, or the situations in which you want one, are where there's no obvious distinction between the rows. So for instance, if you're looking at something like you see in SaaS interface here, there's a very clear distinction between each individual row here, because you've got the album cover, and then the name of the album, and then the artist. This is very distinctly a new row, so the need for a separator bar is not really necessary. However, if you come into something like this, where you're looking at a trading chart and there's no very big distinct differences between the rows, there's a little icon here, right? But it's not really that much. Here is evident that you need the separator bars because otherwise it just looks like a huge dump of information. Now I want to add some interactivity into this table, so I'm going to allow users to select multiple rows and then search through them to find very specific reports that they might want to dig a little bit into. I really want to emphasize this grade somehow, but I think just making the text bigger is going to pull too much visual attention, so I'm going to apply a similar treatment that I do here and here, where I add a nice background color that pulls visual attention slightly, and then adds that green hue in a subtle way, so that we still get the benefit of both worlds without distracting the user. So as you can see, I've run into a bit of a problem here where in an effort to minimize all the color on this table that was like pulling my attention all over the place, I've introduced a lot of color, you know, and I'm trying to think of a way to maybe only emphasize the things that need my attention. For example, if something is 98 out of 100 performance, maybe we just show it as a dark gray and we don't pull the user's attention. So gonna play around with this a little more to see if we can build something that doesn't just yank my attention around the screen so much. Struggling to come up with a way to make the table look a little more clean, so in the meantime I'm going to take a break, fix this logo, and come back to it. Alright, not bad for now. I'm really not a logo designer, but I think that adding this little metallic blue kind of gives it a nice little bit of flair, enough to distinguish it from the links themselves. And now I'm going to add in a little element here to sift through all of the recent reports that you might have completed on GTMetrix, so you can quickly access them from anywhere in the dashboard. Just bumping up the font sizes here a little bit because when looking at things in context, it seemed like the font I was using was just a tad too small. And that's why it's really important sometimes to just look at things on a screen that's not necessarily in Figma. Of course, I'm still in Figma here, right? But looking at things from this context helps me understand, okay, this is hard to read and it looks awkwardly smaller than everything else. So bumping up the fonts globally. And now I'm just going through the entire UI and trying to tidy up the visual hierarchy. I'm kind of just taking a step back and looking at the whole UI and just seeing where my attention goes. And then I'm trying to resolve that if I notice any problems. And just doing that over and over and over again until I'm happy. Now that I'm wrapping things up, I'm realizing that there's no way to swap the options between, say, using Chrome or a data center in Canada or the United States. So I'm going to add those controls here to the UI, and we'll see what comes next. Nice, and then I was worried about putting too many controls here and maybe throwing things off and maybe confusing the user even more. But I really like the idea of just having like two primary controls. These are like the main ones that users are going to toggle. And then all the extra stuff, like whether or not you want ad block and everything, is just abstracted away behind this extra settings button. So instead of this here where we've got all these different options. We just have the main two, browser and data center location, and then the rest of them are kind of hidden away because users probably will never use them. There's no need to like spam them with that information. So I think this is a solid treatment here. There's one thing that I'm trying to squeeze into this UI still, and it's the API usage that you see here, this little element. Like, how can I include this? Because it seems useful, right? But maybe it's just not relevant. It seems useful, and it seems like something that could go on a dashboard, but maybe like, it seems like putting it under the table forces us to use pagination because we can't have just an infinite scroll load more type situation, as it would just push all of these cards farther and farther down the page. But we also, I don't know, maybe we can put it up here in the header. Let's give that a shot. It seems like the overall plan usage isn't really relevant to the user in a persistent way. It's not always relevant. So I think having a little like very low impact status indicator that shares how much of the plan's being used makes sense. And then we can put more detail in a hover state or something. Yeah, something like this I think would work really well, where you could just tell the user how they're using their plan. Do they have a lot of bandwidth left, not very much, and then when they hover, they can see the details. All right, there we go. I think this is overall a much better kind of dashboard experience. And you'll know that I've changed the name to reports because that's really all we're showing here. There's nothing beyond looking at the reports and generating new reports that we're doing here. I would imagine it would make sense if we were building a dashboard to put like a bunch of graphs and stuff here, but for the scope of what we're doing, basically just redesigning an existing UI, didn't really make sense to do. But overall, I think the information hierarchy is really quite solid here. My attention immediately goes to this container here, and that's because of the very saturated blue button here, the drop shadow that causes this to pop out of the screen, and these extra controls which accentuate it. My attention does also get pulled down here, but not nearly as much as it did in the existing UI, because we're using colors that aren't really that saturated, and we're only showing color where it's relevant. Of course, we've got the sidebar navigation, which is much more modern. Additionally, instead of showing the plan usage just persistently, we've got it now up here in a little popover, and I think that it makes so much more sense to kind of abstract that information away from the user and only show it to them when they're interested. So that's it for the dashboard. In the next video, we're going to go into this individual report page and take a stab at this. This one's a beast. There's a lot going on here. So hopefully once both of these pages are sorted, you'll have a really good idea of how you kind of build pages within an existing framework for a SaaS product. But make sure you subscribe, folks. You actually won't be able to see the next video unless you've subscribed to the channel. But either way, hope you found this useful and have a lovely week. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.